It's really an honor to have endurance athlete Cameron Bellamy here today. Cameron, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me.
We're going to specifically focus on a specific event, but I just need to take the audience a little bit through some of your experience at the longest channel swim in history. 151 kilometers from Barbados to St. Lucia. The longest circumnavigation swim in history. 60 miles around the jagged coastline in 41 hours. And then the other very important thing is they call it the Ocean's 7. Only the 11th person in the world, the first South African, that has swam the 7 most dangerous oceans or channels. And then he also decided to cross the Indian Ocean. And that was from Australia to the Seychelles.
I grew up as a flatwater rower, and I did that my whole high school career, university, and it all culminated when I rowed for South Africa at the Under-23 World Championships. But then, like, when you leave university, you have other goals. You suddenly have a career. And I actually got my first job in Beijing, in China. But after 3 years in that kind of expat China setup, I needed to get out. So I basically bought a bike and told my boss I was leaving my company, and a week later I left. I just cycled across into Western China, through China, into Western China, into Kazakhstan, into Kyrgyzstan. I then went down to India and cycled the west coast of India. I just went, and as you can imagine, being for 4 months by yourself, 6,000 kilometers, 4 months, I just started thinking a lot about what I wanted to do. I got very introspective. And then it's kind of then where I wanted to set up a charity when I finished this, to actually do similar things in the future, but do it for a cause. I've done a number of 16-hour swims about there. I've done a 27-hour swim, and then a 41-hour swim, a 56-hour swim, my last one. And even finishing that 56-hour swim, the only thing that wanted me to get out the water was the pain on my lips and my tongue and the sleep deprivation. Yeah, I've learned so much on all these swims and how to mentally persevere, which has been so key to my success. I've become so holistic in how I approach these swims and how I execute the swims. It becomes it's obviously a very mentally focused discipline. And when you're going through emotional hardship, it's so key to reflect within.
But Cameron, there were so many things that you've done, but the one thing that stands out is the most recent one, is called the Impossible Row.
Yeah, the whole aim is to be the first crew to ever row from South America to Antarctica across the Drake Passage. The goals that we have are extremely short term because you don't know what the wind's going to do, and it can change within 6 hours. So suddenly we get good conditions. Now we want to go 50 miles. We're going to try to push it as much. We're going to row as hard as we can to get those 50 miles, and then the wind will change, and then we want to sea anchor again, and then for 12 hours, and then again the winds are in our favor, and we go as hard as we can. And so they were very short-term goals because we never knew that we were going to get to Antarctica until we could almost see it. It was always a risk of not making it, which was extremely stressful. And I think, so we always had these kind of micro goals, like let's go here to here in this period of time. Now, I'd just love to paint the picture for you. We're in this tiny 25-foot rowing boat, 6 of us on there. We're rowing away from Cape Horn. The water is pretty mean and angry, but it's actually relatively calm for this area. This area is the most dangerous, tumultuous body and bit of water on the planet. At Cape Horn alone, in the last 400 years, there's been 800 shipwrecks and 10,000 sailors have lost their lives just in this small area. Wow. And so we're rowing away from it, and we're rowing into the Drake Passage. Now the Drake Passage is where the Pacific, and the Atlantic Oceans all converge in this small little channel, this crossing, making it the most dangerous crossing ever. And our game plan, a short-term game plan, is we have 30 hours of relatively good weather, pretty bad weather, but relatively good weather to row in to get as far south as possible. And from Cape Horn, it shoals out really shallow for about 70 miles. So our goal is in 30 hours to get off the continental shelf, where it's going to be relatively safer off the continental shelf. Because if those storms hit us and we're still on the continental shelf, the waves can reach such high heights, it's incredibly dangerous. And so 28 hours later, we managed to get off the continental shelf into relatively safe conditions. But now, unfortunately, we have this massive low pressure storm hitting us. It's almost a hurricane strength storm. So it whacks straight into us. So me and Jamie we've rowed the Indian Ocean together. We've seen similar conditions to this in the past, where you have a massive storm and these huge falling waves. And when I first experienced that with Jamie, we were petrified. But you kind of get used to it after a while. After a few days, you get used to it. And suddenly after a few more storms, you actually start enjoying the storms because you get used to it. And suddenly you realize you might not die.
Yeah.
And so we were really happy actually. We were rowing as fast as we could to actually catch these waves and surf down these like 30-foot faces. We have hour and a half shifts, and then we switch, and it's continuous. And so every time we come off from rowing, we'd switch with John and Andrew, who this is the first time in a big ocean too. And these transitions had to be really quick because of the dangerous conditions. But I would see them in their facial expressions. Every time they came past us, we would try to like just instill like some wisdom on them. And it's always like, don't worry guys, it's going to be over eventually. Because that's the thing you worry about most, is it ever going to end when you're scared like that. And like a few hours feels like a few days. About day 8 was when I think we found that our bodies were starting to falter and we started to get little injuries. On day 10, it's a memory that will be ingrained in me forever. We suddenly went past our first Antarctic island. So our first sign of land. It had been very misty, so we hadn't really seen land yet. And I came off my resting shift onto the deck, onto my stroke seat. As I did, the mist started to lift. And I looked up and to my right, and there was the first Antarctic island. It was called Smith Island. It goes up from the ocean depth to 7,000 feet, to about 2,000 meters, straight up. It's just white, it's made of ice, glacier, snow. It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. We're rowing in these mirror-like conditions, for once, in the Drake Passage, and we're just rowing calmly past this island. That feeling and that sight will sit with me forever. And now we were suddenly in this like Antarctic wonderland. And it almost felt like we had like gone through hell of the Drake Passage, and now we're in heaven. I think there were so many areas where this expedition should have failed, even mostly before we even left. But the reason why I think we were successful is we did like form an amazing team in light of adversity and in light of some leadership problems. We as a crew like bonded, and I think the main thing that solidified that was Andrew Town, former collegiate Yale University rower, incredibly smart guy. He also was a former CIA agent.
Wow.
And he's a current management consultant at Boston Consulting Group, so one of the top consulting groups in the world. And so he took us through various workshops before we left. And obviously, it was like the goal-setting workshops where we went through our individual goals, our team goals. We got very susceptible with each other, telling each of us our fears and our insecurities, especially about the row. And we just became very transparent with each other. And in essence, we made a pact to be strong, to be ethical, to be moral, to be transparent with each other, and just to be vulnerable, to help each other. And we became this amazing family. So we all went around as a group. Each of us got vulnerable and said, like, what are our fears first? What are our insecurities? What are we worried about the most? And then what do we want to achieve out of this? Our personal goals especially. And we all had different ones. And obviously Andrew was writing all of these down. And then we started working on what are our team goals? And the main thing is how do we want to act? Like what are our principles? And so we worked on like being vulnerable, being ethical, being always being helpful with each other. And that's how we became a family. And I think it's those team goals. It's about not only just making it to Antarctica. Of course, that was our main goal. But it's like, how do we want to do it? How do we want to be seen, especially amongst each other? I would say the whole process of coming up with the goals, especially how we were going to act, it became almost subconscious, and that's just the way we were during the road, which was important. Like we weren't talking about let's be like act like this on the road. It was quite nice how we actually blended together, and all those values that we talked about before kind of came to the fore, and we did look after each other, and we did everything we wanted to do as a group, especially looking after each other. Because as you can imagine, you're in these huge storms. Andrew and John had never been in these conditions before. Me and Jamie were also scared, and you have to be vulnerable. You can't just like act macho and be like, I'm just going to push through this. The best way to go through that is to acknowledge what you're feeling inside and tell your friends and let us help each other. I think it was kind of a beautiful experience, the way that kind of happened, and we did look after each other. Since then, it's changed my outlook on leadership and how I've approached my company and my business. I think it's and my charity too. It's so important to have individual goals that align with the overall organizational goal, and that was the main reason we made it. You know, we had those goals aligned, and we were doing it for each other.